Before we're gonna go ahead and create this page router, let's arrange these imports in these files. So first of all, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring that import React right at the top, and then we're gonna get rid of these main studio model, and let's also get rid of these orbit controls. All right, here we go. All right, now let's head to the main studio model.tsx, and then in here I'm gonna bring that exactly right at the top, and let's get rid of this React. Here we go. And then let's get rid of these use texture hook, since we are actually getting the textures from custom factory that we have created. And then let's bring those gsap files right below this use gltf. And then let's also bring this next navigation right at the top. Here we go. And let's hit the space in order to have some sort of separation between file path and the packages. Let's also bring that up. Here we go. Now let's head back to rig.tsx. Everything in here is fine. All right, now let's head to the page.tsx. All right, it's time to bring our individual shared pages to life. This is where we create that immersive multi-scroll experience you saw in the final site. We are not just showing one 3D model. We are creating a narrative with multiple sections, each with its own 3D scene that the user scrolls through. To do this, we are using multiple view components from Drei, all tied to our single global canvas. All right, so let's implement that. Inside page.tsx, I'm gonna get rid of this canvas since we actually define the global canvas. And then in here, I'm gonna add a JSX fragment, and let's say scene. All right, now this scene will contain our entire scene. For example, the first section, second section, and third section. So let's implement this scene component. Within the components folder, let's create a new file and let's call it Scene.tsx. And then in here, I'm gonna run tsrefce. It is actually similar with the RESCE, but when you are using tsrefce, you're just gonna add the properties. All right, we're gonna implement the properties later, so let's focus on the return. So I'm gonna get rid of this div, and then I'm gonna replace it with main. And let's give this main a class name of min-h-screen in order to take the full height of the screen. And then within it, let's create a section, and let's give this section an ID equals to first section. And let's give it a class name of h-screen. And next, within it, we're gonna create a view from React 3 Drei. And within this view, we're gonna render our 3D model. So here, let's define this view a class name of w-d viewport view and h-dvh in order to take the full height of the screen again. And then within it, we're gonna render the 3D models. So based on the shared types, if the shared type triple equal to white, we're gonna say, please render this first white model as a component. So we didn't define this component yet, but later on we're gonna implement this. All right, now after that, let's duplicate this for 3 times because we have 3 different shared types. And then we're gonna set this second shared type to gray. If it was gray, we're gonna render the first gray model. And whenever it was sport, please render this first sport model. And now for the moment, let's comment this out so that we don't get an error. We just implement these as a reminder. And then next, we need to create another section. I'm just gonna go ahead and duplicate this. And then let's get rid of these comments right over here. And let's also duplicate this again. And we are done. Now, as you can see, in the first section, we're gonna have our first model, and on the second section, we're gonna have our second model, and third one, we're gonna have our third model. So let's change this ID to second, and finally third. Let's uncomment this out. All right, now the key here is the shared type prop. This tells the component which variant of the shared we are viewing, white, gray, or sport. We use this prop to conditionally render the correct 3D model in each section. So let's implement this shirt type. So within the curly brace, we're going to say shirt type is the type of shirt type. So let's define this shirt type property. So let's open up the Explorer, and inside the lib folder in texture.ts, we're going to define it right over here. So within the studio textures, we're going to have shirts, and each shirt going to have 3 different types. So the first one would be white as an object, gray again as an object, and sport again as an object. And within each shirt type, we're going to have sections. So let's say first, let's close the Explorer so that we have more room. Second, and third. All right, now I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this, copy this, and paste it right over here. All right, now as you can see, if I head to the public textures and any of the shirts folder, for example, I'm going to select the white type, you can see that we have first, second, and third. That's the reason why I separated this into these objects. In the first section, we have these textures. And for the second, we only have 2 textures. And finally, for the third textures, we're going to use the environment map. And these are global textures that we're going to use later on. All right, let's collapse that. All right, now within this curly braces, we're going to import these paths. All right, here we go. Now just simply copy and paste that. You guys can get it from my GitHub repository, which is down in the description below again. Now, in order to create those shirt type that we have used in Scene.tsx, you can see that it is already using the shirt type. So let's define that shirt type. So I'm going to say export type shirt type is equals to, we're going to say key of these objects. So we're going to say key of type of studio textures dot shirts. We're going to select as shirts. All right. Now, as you can see, we have the white, sport, and the gray one. Beautiful. And let's also define the page type. For example, first, second, and third. Right below it, let's export the type of page type or section type, whatever you prefer. I'm going to say first, second, and third. There we go. You could also create this manually, but I prefer it this way so that you guys can see it. You can also do it in this way. So let's head back to the Scene.tsx. Now let's import that shirt type from @lib textures. There we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to destruct this object. Let's say shirt type. All right, now it is complaining about the value of this shirt type because we are using the lowercase w, not the uppercase w. Here we go. All right, now we are ready to implement these models. So let's start with the FirstWhiteModel. So I'm just going to comment this out one by one. And then let's also comment these 2 out so that we can focus on the first section. All right, now let's head to the page.tsx. So we need to define the shirt type. So let's head back to the page.tsx in order to get it, the type of the shirt from the URL. So here, right above the return type, we're going to say const params is equals to use params. And then let's say const shirt type is equals to params slug. We're going to get it from the slug as shirt type. And then we're going to cast that to that shirt type. So as you can see, we're going to have white, gray, sport. And then after that, we're going to say if the shirt type doesn't exist, just return not found from next navigation. So we need to import the scene correctly. So we are using @component scene. So let's say shirt type equals to this shirt type. Beautiful. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and clean up some of the imports that we don't need to use. So let's get rid of the canvas and let's bring that navigation to the first. Here we go. Now let's implement this FirstWhiteModel. So let's open up the Explorer, and within the components folder, let's create a new file. And then I'm going to go ahead and call it FirstWhiteModel.tsx. And then in here, we got to use our 3D model. So what kind of 3D model that we're going to use? If you head over to the public models white, we're going to use whitestudio.glb. So in order to use this, we need to convert this glb into JSX. As you can see, our model is right over here. We're going to use this for white scene for the first section. So before I'm going to copy this, let's change the path. So let's open this up. And then for the path prefix, we're going to say it is coming from models white. There we go. Now let's copy all of this and then paste that right over here. Now let's change the component name to FirstWhiteModel. Now let's head back to the other tab. Okay. Now in this component, we are not going to use properties. So let's get rid of these props. And then let's also get rid of these materials for the moment. Okay, now let's also get rid of these cast shadow and receive shadows because we're going to use MeshBasicMaterial. So it would be pointless to use cast shadows and receive shadows. By pressing Ctrl D, and let's delete all of them. Beautiful. Now let's define this useGLTF. So I'm just going to go ahead and simply head to the main studio model, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, paste that right over here, and let's import that 3. So right at the top, I'm going to say import star as 3 from 3. There we go. Now in here, I'm going to say as unknown as GLTF result. All right, now let's get rid of this material. All right, now we need to define the materials right over here. Since we need to use a different texture path, it would be pointless to use this use main studio textures because this one is just only for use main studio textures. All right, so let's implement the other method. So in here, I'm going to say export const, and let's say use shirt page textures equals to an object, a function. And then this function gonna take some sort of parameters. So let's define shirt type. So let's say shirt type here, and then it'll take a page or sections page type. You know what? Let's change the page to the section so that it would be understandable because page is actually not suitable here. So let's convert this to section, and we're gonna change this section type. All right, now let's head to the textures.ts and let's change that to section type. Here we go. Now let's import that correctly. Now let's get rid of that page type. There we go. And then after that, let's also add the modifier so that we can have control over the texture modification. For example, if we wanted to flip it or change the color space or not. So let's say set modifier equals to true, because as a default, we're going to set it to true. And then within the body, we're going to create a const paths equals to, and then we're going to say studio texture dot shirts. We're going to target the shirts, and then we're going to say which one. We have gray, sport, white. So this time we're going to say shirt type, and then after that, we're going to specify the section. So which section? So we have first, second, third. So as you can see, we're going to say section. Now, as you can see, we have all of these paths right over here. And then after that, we need to duplicate this right over here. So instead of duplicating this, we're going to make this as a separate function so that we can use globally. So let's say extract to function in module scope. Let's do that. And then let's name it use modified textures. There we go. Now this use modified texture gonna take a property of paths. Let's say paths. So what is the type of path? Is a record of string. And then let's set the modifier to Boolean. There we go. And after that, instead of hard coding this, we're gonna say this specific path. And then let's use the set modifier by saying if set modifier. was true, then modify the texture for me, please. Otherwise, we are not going to modify the texture. And after that, we're going to return the texture. All right, now let's use this use modified textures within this use shared page texture. There we go. I'm going to say return. I'm going to say return these paths. There we go. And for the second property, we're going to set the modifier here. Now let's also fix this. Since it is using the main studio texture, we're going to say studio textures.main. Now we're going to set the modifier to true. There we go. Now let's refresh it. Now, as you can see, everything is actually working normally. So if I click on the white shirt, we're going to get an error because it is saying that use params is a hook. So whenever you use a hook, we need to use client. So let's do that. So inside page.tsx, right above this import, we're going to say use client. All right, everything is black here. So let's uncomment this shirt type equals to white. And then let's import this FirstWhiteModel. There we go. All right, now at least we have white screen. All right, so let's head to the FirstWhiteModel. Let's collapse the explorer. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that factory that we have created. Right below this use gltf, I'm going to say const textures equals to use shirt page textures. Also, let's change the name of this function since we are renaming this page to sections. So let's click on this one, Control Shift F. And then what I'm going to do is click on this button and let's say use shirt section textures. All right, now after that, let's click on this replace all. Replace it. Here we go. Now let's collapse that. And then we're going to say the what type of shirt that we are using is white shirt, definitely. And then after that, we're going to say we are on the first section. Here we go. All right, now let's say const mats is equals to create materials. And then we're going to say get that textures. All right, now as you can see, we have all of the materials right over here. But as you can see, the type is string. So we need to cast that in order to make it Strangler type by saying as what? So let's head to the texture.ts. You can see that studio textures dot shirt dot white dot first. And then we're going to get all of these. So let's do that. So in here, I'm going to say record of key of type of studio textures dot shirts. You can also use dot, but I'm going to use the other way by saying brackets white, another bracket first. And then for the value, we're going to say 3.MeshBasicMaterial. Let's close that record. Now, as you can see, our material is strongly typed right now. You can also create this in another way. So let's create the alternative way of this. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. So inside the texture.ts, let's scroll down. I'm going to go ahead and paste that right over here. And then in here, I'm going to say export type texture key. I'm going to give it a name, texture key. And then let's do the generic one. And then we're going to say S gonna extend from where, from shirt type. And after that, P gonna extends from the section type. And then instead of hard coding right here, I'm gonna say S. And after that, here I'm gonna say P. Now let's head to the FirstWhiteModel.tsx. And then in here, I'm gonna say texture key and then let's say white. Let's import that correctly. Okay, white. And for section, you can also select what type of section. So I'm going to say first. All right, now as you can see, we have the same result. All right, now let's get rid of these redundant imports, studio textures. Let's get rid of this. And then let's also get rid of this import React. There we go. Also give it a space. Beautiful. All right, now let's use these materials. So here I'm going to give this mesh a material equals to mats.dj. You can see our table is identified. Now let's copy this, paste that right over here. For speakers, we're going to say mats.speakers. Here we go. And then let's paste that out over here. And then let's say for the LED cube, we're going to add studio. Let's also get rid of this cast shadow and receive shadow. Paste that right over here. And then this time we're going to use the shirt one. There we go. And then paste that right over here again. I'm going to say mats.wall. So it is actually baked together with the studio. And then let's also say floor is also use studio. And then we're going to say material dj.tv. And then TV screen, gonna use TV. Yes, this one is gonna use studio, the geometry one. Okay, now as you can see right here, we have defined our first white section. All right, now let's also define the other one. As you can see the scene, we have the FirstGrayModel. So let's uncomment that. So let's create this FirstGrayModel. So right click on the components folder, new folder, and FirstGrayModel.tsx. And in here, we're going to use the related model. So if I hit to the gray, you can see that we need to convert this to JSX. So let's open up that website again. Let's refresh it. And then let's open this up. As you can see, this is the gray one that we're going to use. All right, now, just like before, I'm going to change the path prefix to models./gray. There we go. Now let's just simply copy this and paste that in FirstGrayModel. All right, now let's change the model to FirstGrayModel. There we go. All right, now I'm gonna remove this props right over here. And just like before, I'm gonna copy this and also copy this one and also copy the texture path. Here we go. And then paste that one by one right over here. So first, we're going to paste that the texture. So let's import that. Here we go. And then let's import that 3.MeshBasicMaterial. So you can say import star as 3 from 3. Okay. Now let's import that useGLTF, which is right over here. And then let's also cast this. There we go. Let's get rid of these materials. And then let's give it a space between these two. Here we go. Now let's head back to that page. Now we're gonna head to the gray one. Shirts gray. All right, now as you can see, it is complaining about FirstGrayModel is not defined. So let's head to the Scene.tsx and then let's import that. All right, now let's head back to that FirstGrayModel. Now what we're gonna do is just like before, we need to use that texture. So this time, instead of saying white, we're gonna use gray one and let's cast that to that. Beautiful. Now, as you can see, we have the different materials. Here we go. Now let's implement that right over here by saying mats.shirt. Beautiful. And before I'm gonna add the material, let's get rid of these cast shadow and receive shadows. Okay. Now for this material, let's use mats.floor. For this one, we're gonna use mats.wall. And finally, mats.assets. Now we have just simply defined our gray model. Perfect. All right, now finally, let's implement for the sport one. So let's head to the Scene.tsx, uncomment this, and let's create this one. Let's open up the Explorer, inside the component, new folder, .tsx, and then we need to convert this sport model. So let's head to the public folder, sport studio.glb. All right, now as you can see, we have sport story right over here. Let's change the path by saying models sport. Here we go. Let's copy all of this and let's head back to the FirstSportModel.tsx and then paste that right over here. And let's also change the model name to FirstSportModel, and let's get rid of these properties. There we go. Let's also get rid of these React and useRef. And then just like before, we're gonna add the useGLTF. Here we go. And then let's also add that 3 by saying import star as 3 from 3. And then after that, let's cast this out by saying as unknown as GLTF. And let's remove this. And finally, we got to add these textures. So let's say const this one. Let's import these, use textures. Here we go. Beautiful. Now let's head back to that shirts sport, and then let's just wait. As you can see, we need to define it. Let's head to the Scene.tsx and then just simply import that. Now, as you can see, it is completely black because we haven't defined these textures. So let's get rid of these cast shadows and receive shadows. Beautiful. All right, now let's change that white to sport. We are using the first one. Beautiful. And then sport. As you can see, we have different type of materials. So let's say mats.shirt, and then we're going to say mats.environment, and for the ramp we're going to say mats.ramp, and finally for the skateboard we're going to say mats.skateboard. There we go. And just like that, we have built our first set of models for the landing section. See how clean and simple that was? The texture factory and our centralized materials logic. Creating these variants was incredibly straightforward. We just imported our pre-built materials and applied them to the geometry. This is the power of solid architecture. It makes adding new features fast and easy. But we are not done yet. The real magic of this product page is in the storytelling. We don't just show one angle. We take the user on a journey. That's where our second model and third model comes in. These components will handle the more complex scene. The close-up, the detailed shot, the interactive moments that really makes the product shine.